That is insane. Wallop. Ratchet doing a drop kick. Bang. I suppose that's the thing. You can do that kind of thing. God, they make all the Decepticons absolutely terrifying. I find myself fairly emotional. I'm really glad they didn't like darken Optimus and make him like he's kindly, but he's in the midst of a story where everyone is a nutcase. Even Ratchet chewing him out. He's a sensitive soul, Optimus. There's a lot of green on this page. Holy shit. So effective. That's something that never happens in the cartoon. Like, they never have a one-to-one chat like with Soundwave. Optimus never tries to reason individually with a Decepticon. And that's why you don't. Wow. I've mentioned before how I feel like now is the best time to get back into Transformers collecting. The figures that are being released are exactly what I want, but I couldn't have guessed that there'd also be a new animated movie in theatres, and now a new comic book series that retells the G1 story in a new way for adult readers. That's what Skybound Transformers is, a reimagining of the classic G1 story with modern sensibilities and with a much more mature audience in mind. It's not a new concept. There are the IDW comics that have been doing something similar for many years, but I never got into those for a variety of reasons. The primary being I wasn't really thinking about Transformers. I wasn't collecting. The Bayverse movies weren't really what I wanted, and IDW seemed like targeted at a very hardcore fan. When I got back into Transformers a few years ago, I thought my mission was dive into the cartoon and the comics that I remembered from childhood. I really didn't expect there'd be much that was new and current that would appeal to a fan like me. I was really wrong though, because this new Skybound series is definitely my favourite iteration of Transformers, possibly since the original G1 cartoon. Let me say that again, because you might be an old git like me, someone who's seen Transformers universes come and go for the past 40 years, and be wondering why you should give a new comic book a look. In my opinion, it's the best written of any Transformers story I've come across, possibly even the original Marvel run, although that's an unfair comparison since the intended audience is obviously very different, and it's a retelling, so the originality comes at you from an angle. I'll talk more about that later. But there is originality in it, there are surprises in it, and there are reasons to read it. First though, I want to credit Delta Tryon, fellow YouTuber, for opening my eyes to this comic. It was listening to his in-depth analysis of the story and the characters that just made me think, look, if this guy is giving this new comic the time of day, then I've got to give this a look. It's not some throwaway thing. It's something that's worthy of attention and real study, for want of a better word. So yeah, I just wanted to credit him for that. I'm going to split this video, which is my reaction to the comic, into two parts. The first part will be spoiler free and geared towards the G1 fan who's considering whether or not to start reading. Here I'll restrict myself to the first few pages of the first issue to not spoil, and I'll drop in some footage of me just messing around with figures. Then we'll move on to the second part where I will talk about spoilers and I'll talk about my thoughts about what happens in the episode in depth. But I'll give you a shout out when I'm doing that so you won't be spoiled. Well, one really obvious point I must mention straight out the gate is that the book itself is a work of art. I'm not an art critic. I'm unused to describing art, so my vocabulary might be lacking here. But it seems to me the difference between a comic that's well drawn with characters that are dynamic and dynamic scenes, both of which Skybound Transformers has, and a comic that feels like a work of art is a consistent tone and target throughout. The art evokes a mood and has a purpose. In the case of Skybound Transformers, this is the sense of brooding danger that I feel the visuals have, that expresses what a very dangerous concept this is, that a bunch of warring titans crash land on Earth. It's almost always nighttime, and even when it isn't, you feel like it is. High contrast, dynamic shadows. It's both appealing and unsettling at the same time. During action scenes, Transformers and sometimes the humans seem to explode across the page, and there's a real sense of visceral movement throughout. Then everything goes still, and you'll have these panels where there's just a character in thought. I wish I knew more about art criticism so I could talk about this more, but to not mention the art first would seem like a disservice to the medium. No matter how good the writing is in a comic book, it's always about the artwork first, and this comic book just looks great. But when it comes to the story, that's where I was most surprised by how original it felt, even though it's technically not. We know already what's going to happen, and in some ways this comic sticks very closely to the original G1 story. But this is what I was talking about, the originality in a work of reinterpretation like this coming at you obliquely. Knowledge of what was done before is an integral part of why the new elements work and why something iterative like this can still surprise you, be both a nod to the original and an evolution of it. It assumes knowledge on the part of the reader, and that knowledge is required for the most emotional, exhilarating or shocking moments to really work. If someone pitched the modernisation of a beloved story to me and foregrounded the way it speeds up the original, I would be sceptical. There's nothing wrong with taking your time, and I'd be the first person to point to modern reboots that sacrifice nuance and intelligent writing for fast-paced thrills. But the way in which Daniel Warren Johnson and the team at Skybound accelerate proceedings works to the story's benefit, I feel. I'd point to Peter Jackson's speeding up of The Lord of the Rings for the movie as an example, removing, for instance, the 17-year gap between Gandalf leaving the Shire and returning with news of the ring. There's really no need for that passage of time to be there before the story gets going. Something similar happens in Skybound, and broadly it speeds everything up in what I feel is a good way. I mentioned in my retrospective of the G1 cartoon how I found many of the episodes repetitive. Megatron comes up with a diabolical plan to secure new energy. Optimus stops him each week, rinse and repeat. The need for power still drives everything in these early episodes of the comic, but it's condensed in such a way that it's much more urgent. The Autobots have to power up before the Decepticons do, or it's curtains. And I really mean that. The Decepticons display an almost pathological hatred for the Autobots, and there's no doubt as soon as they have the means they will brutally murder them all. Also, things are mentioned that are never really touched upon in G1. I would point to the careful attention given to the effects of a centuries-long war on the characters. Mirage is weary of war in the cartoon, and Optimus seems to be driven to defeat Megatron, but they never seem psychologically damaged or traumatized in any way. Trauma is a strong word. Optimus isn't a basket case in these first 6 issues, which I'm thankful for, since you can go too far with that kind of trauma porn, stripping stories and characters of their heart, but he is suitably damaged. So too are several of the characters we know and love. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that Cliffjumper is in there, and what they do with him is really great. His introduction is comedic and you immediately warm to him, but we quickly learn he's not going to be just the comic relief. I could go on, I could talk about all the different elements of why you should give this a go in more detail, but I think without going into spoilers, it's going to be very difficult to do that. If you're someone like me who is G1 focused and has been looking for a mature reinterpretation of those original G1 characters and broadening out into a wider retelling of the Transformers story with intelligently written, great artwork, nuanced characters, and things in it that will surprise and delight you and horrify you at times, this is the comic. So it has my recommendation. So I would definitely pick up the first volume, which is what I did, and start catching up. All right. Have all the people worried about spoilers gone? Because this is your last chance for you to get out of here. Okay, here we go. Questions. That's what the characters' depictions in the comic raise for me, and why I think this is a good retelling. I come away asking questions I never asked of G1 before. Or if I did, it was very early on and I've forgotten. I've just long since accepted the status quo. Questions like, exactly why do the Decepticons hate the Autobots so much? Starscream literally calls the Autobot symbol evil, and even if we don't believe him, he's so emphatic, there's no doubt he believes what he's saying. Something about the war has turned this Transformer into a lunatic, and for the first time I feel like there's more to him than simply a murderous bad guy. What motivates this unbridled hatred? That's my first question that I come away thinking about the most from Skybound Transformers. I've always wanted the two factions in Transformers to be less black and white, so maybe it's wishful thinking. But what I'm hoping is that as the story goes on, this will be explored a lot more. I even think there is that hint of it here, because the majority of the real violence in the early issues is perpetrated by Starscream. Soundwave even questions it, why are we being so violent and aggressive? And he and Skywarp seem more interested in fixing the energy problem in a more calculated way. I almost get the sense that this is the first time the Decepticons have been quite this brutal, and a switch was flipped when Starscream assumed leadership. The merciless violence on display isn't simply a product of being a Decepticon, it's a product of Starscream having taken control. I could be wrong about all of this, obviously. Skywarp even says at one point when he's attacking the humans, this is fun, as if the threat of violence is a kind of a new deal. I'm not saying the Decepticons were benign before the crash and simply misunderstood. There is a shot of Megatron trying to gouge Optimus's eyes out. So they're clearly the more selfish, dangerous faction, but I don't think it's entirely in my imagination either. I think they feel justified in their mission to wipe out the Autobots for some perceived crime or societal failing. This is further emphasized by removing the search for energy as the main reason the Autobots leave Cybertron. Optimus tells us their numbers had dwindled to the point where there was no hope. They were just trying to escape, essentially, and that's victory. At that point, the Decepticons have won. So the fact they still pursue them pushes this beyond a political conflict or a contest for resources. It's an ideological battle for which the only victory condition for the Decepticons is genocide. I really hope the explanation for this, if we get one, is better than the War Dawn episode of the cartoon in which a new type of Transformer that can fly, of course they can all fly in the cartoons, but let's skip that, simply decides it's time to turn on all the others. I've jumped to this overarching point because, as I say, it's the most intriguing question for me. But the first sign that the series isn't going to be afraid to do things differently is obviously the killing of Bumblebee. I wonder if the makers of this comic had to fight for that level of license to do what they want, or is it understood by all involved, even Hasbro, that this comic is for adults and so they should be able to go to pretty extreme places. It's shocking for long-time Transformers fans, of course, but with my cynical head whirring away, I can't help thinking this was bold in terms of the brand. It's Bumblebee, for goodness sake. After Optimus, probably the most recognisable face of the franchise, and he's dead straight away. This is a calculated decision to put the reader on edge, because if they can kill Bumblebee, they can kill anyone. And it works. On several occasions I was afraid to turn the page in case they went full Tarantino and started killing every beloved character left and right. Thankfully they don't do that, not in the first 6 episodes, which lends weight to the deaths that do occur. I think only 3 really bite the farm with finality. Bumblebee, Skywarp and Reflector. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. It seems like many more humans die than Transformers, and this is the first time I remember really worrying for every human in the proximity of one of these 20-foot tall metallic giants, regardless of its current faction alignment. Starscream's delight in squishing humans is darkly comic because, again, it's an idea we all surely have considered as adults and possibly even as kids as well. Yet the program makers and the comic writers of the past were always careful to sidestep that as an issue. I should mention again, I never read the IDW run, so I would be surprised if this kind of thing hasn't been explored there, but I can only speak from my experience, and this is the first time that has been really addressed in the media for me. Starscream's malice towards the indigenous life of the planet is in stark contrast to Optimus's poignant understanding of the massive threat he and his kind present to the planet. And it's the first time I've really considered what it would be like to be a Transformer on Earth, as he describes the ground wobbling as he walks. It must be like living on a bouncy castle where everything yields to the slightest touch. I also love Cliffjumper's immediate terror at the sight of Carly. Every character seems to have their own perspective and take on things, and it's nice to see Ratchet clearly point out where he feels Optimus is losing perspective. If everyone follows blindly, then Optimus isn't really a great leader at all. He's just the guy who happens to be in charge at that moment. The guys will follow whoever. So it's important for the characters like Ratchet to be there. The possibility has to exist that Optimus might be wrong for his decisions to matter. The moment when he finally uses the Matrix is powerful because, as Ratchet points out, it could be a massive waste that they'll live to regret. Another thing I remember feeling frustrated with in Transformers stories of the past is the treatment of their first interactions with humans. I like the original cartoon and comic take more than the Bayverse, which focused more on the military, but still, those cartoons and comics, it was very unrealistic. They just found a couple of signature humans that became the proxy for humanity as a whole. Here I feel the night where the Transformers arrive and start stomping around is probably the most realistic take yet, as not just Spike and Sparkplug get involved, but the whole neighbourhood bands together, and there's obvious collateral damage beyond those central human protagonists. The interweaving of the human and Transformers backgrounds is particularly effective throughout, and the use of mirroring to tie things together gives these first 6 episodes a cohesion that's pleasing, as the journeys of several characters either play out to a conclusion or dovetail together at key moments. Carly and Cliffjumper, Sparky and Optimus, mirroring of characters, but also contrast, as the Decepticons kill Skywarp for parts, while the Autobots repair as much of Wheeljack as they can, two torsos doing their best for their respective factions in very different ways. It makes me smile because so much work like this is done throughout. Little details, be they character moments or plot beats or some outworking of a larger theme. It's written for Transformers fans, but I feel those fans who are looking for something deeper, more meaningful than your usual Transformers fare, which can be kiddie. I'm glad I read it. I'm really glad I read it. It's opened my horizons, as I say, to the idea that there are modern Transformers stories being written, which I'm absolutely the intended audience. I'll definitely be continuing to read. Now I've got Transformers 1 as well to look forward to. Now it's out in the UK, so I plan on watching that. The first fully animated Transformers movie since 1986. I can't miss it. And I do wonder how it will stack up to the last one. Maybe that's a topic for a future video. Thank you for watching, guys. Let me know your thoughts about Skybound Transformers, whether you're reading it now or planning to start. And of course, sub up for future videos. I've been Nepyet, and I'll see you next time.